In this lesson, we will be identifying relationships between corresponding terms and patterns. Before we can identify relationships between corresponding terms, we actually have to create the terms. So that requires us to create two patterns that are going to follow different rules. So we're going to do pattern A and pattern B. And pattern A says to start with 0 and add 3 with each term. So down here in our chart, I'm going to start with 0. So I'm putting a 0 where our start is. I used the wrong color. 0 where our start is. And then add 3 with each term. So if I add 3 to that, I will get 3. Add 3 to that, I'll get 6. 3 to that, I'll get 9. 3 to that, I'll get 12. And 3 to that, I'll get 15. I have now followed the terms for pattern A. Now I'm going to move on to pattern B. Pattern B says I'm going to start with 0. We're starting with the same number. And we're adding 6 with each term. So when I add 6, I will have 6. I will have 12. I will have 18. I will have 24. And I will have 30. Every time I move from one place to the right in my pattern, I am moving from term to term. Each of these is a term. Corresponding terms refer to two terms in two different patterns that fall in the same step. At our starting point, both patterns start with 0. These are corresponding terms. And as I continue down with each of the steps, these are also corresponding terms. So for example, here 9 and 18 are corresponding terms in these two patterns. 15 and 30 are also corresponding terms. Now identifying relationships between the corresponding terms can be tricky. If I look at these corresponding terms, I have 6 and 12 here at step 3. And I want to look at how they relate to each other. How do they compare? So I know that 12 is 6 more than 6, right? So I could say that 12 is 6 more than 6. I could also say that 12 is twice as much as 6, or I could say that 6 is half as much as 12. But whatever I identify as a relationship between these two terms, it should be consistent with all of the corresponding terms. So if I am going to be asked to identify the correct phrase down here, the term in pattern A is 6 more than its corresponding term in pattern B. That would apply here. But it wouldn't apply here because 18 is more than 6 more than 9. So it couldn't be pattern or this one. The second one, the term in pattern A is half as much its corresponding term in pattern B. Well, that would apply here to 9 because 9 is half of 18, 12 is half of 24, and 15 is half of 30. So that one would work. The last one, the term in pattern A, is twice the value of the term in pattern B. That would not work because that would mean that this is twice as much. So that's just making sure that we're paying attention to what it's actually asking. So remember, what you identify as the relationship between the two corresponding terms has to apply equally for all of the sets of corresponding terms between the two patterns. Let's go back and look to see if we can apply that relationship to the original rules we started with. So since we started both of these patterns on 0, we are going to look at the rule. Add 3 as plus 3. That was for pattern A. For pattern B, it was add 6. If we look at the rules, starting from the same starting point, the rules will have the same relationship as the corresponding terms as the patterns play out. For this one, the pattern is going to look a little different, and so are the relationships that go along with it. So for pattern A, we're starting with 2, and we're adding 2 with each term. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. That seems pretty common. Now for pattern B, we're starting with 2, and we're adding 5 with each term. So 7, 12, 17, 22, and 27. Now if I look at these connections, they don't just pop out at me. 4 and 7. I can't multiply 4 by anything to get to 7, But 6 and 12 I can. That's just like we had before. 12 is twice as much as 6. However, that doesn't apply again. 8 times 2 is 16, not 17. So sometimes when there isn't a clear-cut connection, we have to look for something different. So if I take this 4 and 7 and I find the difference between the two, so I subtract them. Let's see if we can find out how much space is between 4 and 7. I'm going to subtract. 7 minus 4 equals 3, and I'm just going to write that down here. Then let's look at 6 and 12. If I look at the difference between 6 and 12, the difference is 6. Now let's look at the difference between 8 and 17. The difference is 9. 22 and 10, the difference is 12. And remember, I find the difference just by subtracting pattern B minus pattern A, or subtracting pattern A from pattern B. And the last one, I can probably identify if you see there is a pattern here. 3, 6, 9, 12. The difference between 12 and 27 is 15. Now to put that into words, because it changes, it's not like the difference is always 3 or the difference is always 6, I can refer to that difference. The difference between corresponding terms changes in a certain way. And let's look up here. Here, my first rule was add 2, and my second rule was add 5. Notice that there is a connection. The difference between 5 and 2 is 3. However, as this pattern continues down, it's going to get bigger and bigger. Notice that the difference keeps increasing, because with each term you're adding 2 to 1, and then the other term you're adding 5 to that one. So that difference of 3 is going to increase. As we look to our suggested relationships, let's look down here. The term in pattern A is twice its corresponding term in pattern B. Well, we already agreed that that doesn't work. It only works in the 6 and the 12 here. So we have to rule that one out. What about the term in pattern A is 3 less than the term in pattern B? Well, that only applies here in 4 and 7. It doesn't apply in anything else. So we're going to have to rule that one out. And the last one down here, it talks about the difference. So the difference between corresponding terms increases by 3 with each term. So we found the difference between the terms, and we can't just say the difference is always 3, because it's not. But the difference increases with each term. And how much does it increase? It increases by 3 each term, which goes back to our rules. There is a difference of 3. So that makes sense that it would increase by 3 with each term. In this lesson, we learned how to identify relationships between corresponding terms in patterns.